considered what happens to your props and costumes after the show is done? Are you conscious of the impact that your theatre making might have on our planet? Welcome back to the VIEWcast. My name's Charis Winter, and I'll be hosting this episode looking at sustainability in the theatre industry. I've delved deep into the Theatre Green Book, researched into companies pioneering sustainable theatre making practices, and found some examples of climate joy to help beat the climate anxiety we might face when thinking about sustainability and climate change. I'll also be joined later by the wonderful Rosie Townshend, the new executive director of Wild Arts Opera, for an interview discussing more about sustainability in the creative arts. But let's start with the basics. What is sustainability? Why is it important to us? And what is the Theatre Green Book? In essence, sustainability is the ability to support or maintain a practice continuously over time. Gro Harlem Brundtland, the former first Prime Minister of Norway, defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I want to dwell a little bit on this idea of future generations. I think the importance of sustainable practice, especially in the theatre industry and the creative arts, is so vital so that we can continue to make theatre in the future. As a young theatre maker today, it's so important that the practice I am instilling in my own work allows me to continue doing this long time in the future. The Theatre Green Book itself notes that the importance of making theatre today without compromising the dreams of future theatre makers. Again, dwelling on this idea of sustainability, promoting work for the future and for the future of theatre making. And I realise I've mentioned it a couple of times without explaining what it is, but the Theatre Green Book is a document created by UK theatres to help with the transition to more sustainable theatre making practices. At the start of June 2024, version 2 was released, which has used more research into sustainability to improve the document. The Theatre Green Book provides a complete method for environmentally sustainable theatre based on both practical expertise from theatre makers and research from sustainability experts. And it operates in stages: basic, intermediate, advanced, and a new stage as part of version 2 called preliminary. The Theatre Green Book states that this clear structure enables theatres to commit to net zero by 2030, knowing exactly what needs to be done to achieve that target. This preliminary stage that's been added in for version 2 is a great initial step to start encouraging theatre companies to introduce sustainability into their work. It's all about making a commitment to start being more sustainable, having a climate panel and an action plan, and putting sustainability at the forefront of all of your decisions. Thinking about, okay, this is an idea we've got to do. Now, how can we make it sustainable before we get too carried away in what we're making? As well as the Theatre Green Book, another great initiative within the creative industries is an organisation called Culture Declares. Organisations and individuals pledge to take action to harness the power of arts and culture, to express heartfelt truths and to address deep-rooted injustices, to take care for and create adaptive, resilient and joyous communities, and to influence the urgent and necessary transformation of harmful global systems. So over 1,700 companies and organisations have already declared their commitment to Culture Declares, including companies like Bristol Old Vic, Cardboard Citizens, and Home in Manchester. And another company that has pledged commitment to Culture Declares is Wild Arts, a touring opera charity based in Colchester, who aim to make music and arts both accessible to more people and sustainable. Last week, I spoke with Rosie Townshend, who's recently taken the role of Executive Director at Wild Arts. Before this, Rosie was working at National Youth Theatre as head of producing and has also worked at Royal and Derngate Theatre in Northampton. And I'm really thrilled to have an interview today with Rosie Townshend. Rosie, do you want to tell me a little bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, hi, Charis. Thanks so much for inviting me on. This is my first podcast, so I'm super excited to be here. I'm a theatre producer and I lecture on the Mount View course. And I have a special personal interest and passion in sustainability. And I'm trying to bring that more into my work because I think theatre has a real opportunity to do that. Currently, I am working on a few different things. I have been head of producing at National Youth Theatre, and I've recently started working for a touring opera company, Wild Arts, who have sustainability as one of their kind of core tenants. And I recently also completed some carbon literacy training, which was super interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yes, definitely. To begin with, let's chat about your move to wild arts. Can you talk about why it was important for you to work with a company that has sustainability at the forefront of what it's doing, and also the sort of work that wild arts are creating?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I was talking to the chair of our board at Wild Arts this week, and he was saying that he thinks every company needs to be sustainable. So, in some ways, although Wild Arts is talking about it perhaps more than some other companies, actually, it should be what every company is thinking about, because we don't have this choice for where we're going towards net zero. And that's alarmingly quickly that that's coming up. But for me, I think particularly when you work for a touring company, and you think about the logistics of moving a company of 20, 25 people around at any given moment, and there's 21 tour dates for just this summer, and then there's also another 15 opera evenings that we're doing. I think it feels, when you're looking at that and the amount of bodies and production kit and everything, you have more of an obligation with that. Whereas I think I've worked a lot in theatre buildings as well, and I think there it feels very obvious how you turn your lights off, and you think about your energy usage. And I think that's already a bit further progressed, whereas there's not really any clear map for how wild arts can make work. We can kind of make those choices, and so I guess we're just putting that at the forefront. So we're saying, well, this is justifying why we're going to make some of those choices that we do. We may not get it right all the time. We may not be the experts, but it's at least an ambition of ours. And I think that then brings the whole company on that journey with us, so that when you're saying to people, well, we might be doing things a little bit differently, go, this is why. And hopefully then you get buy-in from people. And I think that's going to happen more and more.
Yes, definitely. And I think I'm really glad you touched on the touring aspect, because I think this is something that's often overlooked a little bit within our industry in terms of sustainability, and can often feel a little bit like a sort of throwaway, or we'll just take the train, or we'll try and use an electric van or something like that. But actually thinking about logistically how we can make touring theatre as sustainable as possible.
But it's interesting, nothing's perfect. I mean, it's really interesting when you think about disparity between musicians and the kind of instrument that they play. And somebody playing a double bass will probably need to drive, because they're not as able to do that. And so it's really interesting. And it also, I think, for us thinking about that as producers, where that then has impact on the finances as well, that sometimes to be more sustainable, it costs a bit more money.
I think, yeah, there often feels like there's a sort of luxury in sustainability. Also, potentially, there's an advantage in touring then if you're potentially limiting the cost on the planet that audience traveling to see your productions might incur.
Yeah, and I think even within that, we think about that in terms of the locations around the country one might tour to. Working at National Youth Theatre, it's always trying to be a national company, but going, well, how are we making sure that we're not just focusing stuff in London and the Southeast? How are we really making sure that that geographical spread is there? So in some ways, it is quite helpful if you're setting out a sustainability policy, or you're looking into a company's sustainability. How are they defining that? Because that can then really help us actually understand what it is that they're doing.
I know Wild Arts is committed to like One Planet Living in your practices. Can you talk to me a little bit more about what that is, and why that's important for the company?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been with the company only for a few weeks now, so I may borrow some words from Orlando, who's the artistic director, who was talking to me recently about the idea that if you look at the amount of carbon and break it down against the population of the planet, everyone has a kind of allocation.
Yeah.
And that we have this allocation to use, and there's huge disparity obviously around the world with those that are using more than their fair share and those that aren't. Thinking about this one planet, I think it's holistic, and looking at all different areas. But again, I think that's interesting. I mean, I'd love to actually spend a bit of time workshopping that word and see what that means to the company. And I think particularly because it's a really growing organization, what does that mean with growth alongside it as well?
Yes, definitely. I think something that's really interesting about the sort of arts and culture sector is that it has got a real potential for power in a sort of in the face of the climate crisis with what we're doing. And like this, even from the fact that theatre itself as a mechanism for storytelling and informing people, theatre is so engaging and connects communities and brings peoples together and can sort of help create like a capacity for action. I think it's really interesting. Like one of the principles in the One Planet Living is culture and community and sort of bringing communities together. There's a real sort of beauty in Wild Arts that you are a touring company and you are creating these sort of hyperlocal productions. You operate in London and Essex mostly, but then tour nationally and internationally. Is that correct?
Well, this is the first time that we're doing some more European touring, but we won't probably go beyond Europe because of the flying.
Yeah.
So yeah, anywhere that's accessible by train will be on our future list as the company grows.
Yeah. But that's great that like you're able to find ways to bring theatre that can sort of create communities and also be this sort of powerful mechanism for changing the way that we think about sustainability in theatre making. Like as a young person that experiences climate anxiety quite a lot, like I find work that inspires more sort of hope for a positive future and like inspires positive action from myself and my peers to be far more engaging than more kind of doomsday pieces of work that focus on sort of apocalypse and encourage my sort of climate anxiety further. I think it's one of the things that I admire about the work that's being done in the sector by companies like Wild Arts and Julie's Bicycle and the work that's been done constantly with the Theatre Green Book, that we're able to sort of look at like positive hope and a much more optimistic future. Like maintaining these sustainable practices helps to maintain our industry, so that we can keep making theatre.
Yeah, and just to say something a little bit further about that is I think, we're human and I think sometimes it's okay to try and not always succeed. That's what's interesting about the Theatre Green Book standards is that you have these different levels. And I'm doing a show later on this year at Wilton's Music Hall, which is being done under the Theatre Green Book. And we've gone, look, we're going to aim for baseline.
Yeah.
But we may be able to achieve greater than that. So let's kind of see, but we'll start there, because it's the first time that National Youth Theatre have actually really gone, no, we're absolutely going to definitely do that. And then with the other show that sits alongside that, 12th Night, we've gone, we're not quite sure as much about that show. So let's say that War of the Worlds, the show at Wilton's, is going to be on Theatre Green Book. And then the other one will aspire to be, and we'll do our very level best. But we're just going to go on that journey because we're still working it out. Look at it, review it, talk about things that maybe we could have done better or learning from it. Then that also still feels really valuable. And I guess that talks in a little bit to your climate anxiety, is that rather than just going, no, it's too overwhelming, it's going, well, no, there's stepping stones along this. There's and then also for me, I think in my role, it's about then sharing that and going, okay, well, to my friends and colleagues, well, let me see, let me tell you where I think we were great and where I think actually we could have done a little bit better. Like, I think that's what a really great role that we have within this to really shout about that and share that information.
Yes. Outside of the theatre industry, are there things you do in your own life to try and reduce your own carbon footprint, or do you ever feel those sort of climate pressures sort of outside of your career?
Yeah, absolutely. The big joke in my family is that I converted my mother-in-law. It's like, you can't use this much cling film. It's like, honestly. And so she jokes me every time because she's got these little, like, they look a bit like shower caps, and she uses them on all her things. And she's like, look, I'm using my reusable things. And so there's kind of this joke because you do feel a bit sometimes like a broken record. It's like, you get those the bags that if you buy something in the supermarket that your vegetables come in, but you have to take them to the big supermarket. And so I kind of go around and I fish things out of bins, and you think, gosh, I really am the crazy lady here, just really beating this drum. But I think a lot of this work that I do comes from a personal passion.
Yes. Oh, I can relate to the bins. I think in my second year, I must have bothered all of my flatmates, making them get their recycling out and wash it up and things like that. Um, yeah, I think that's nice. That like more than anything, there's a mindset that really is a great sort of starting point for thinking about sustainable practice, both in your own life and also within this industry. But yeah,
Yeah,
being conscious, being
and
mindful.
and Karis, I'd recommend to you and actually anyone else who gets the opportunity to do any of the carbon literacy training, because it
Yes.
gives you just more of actually a really educated understanding of things. And it was just a day-long course, and actually we had Jen run it, who used to work at the Unicorn, so came at it really from a theatre background, and I just found that really helpful because I'm pretty engaged, but there was still stuff within that I was like, oh, okay, no, that's good. I do have the correct understanding of that, or actually that's something I want to look more into, even though it's just a kind of whistle stop day-long workshop. But yeah, I would really recommend that to anyone that's interested.
And that's specifically for the theatre industry, thinking
Well,
about.
she has tailored it. The carbon literacy is run by the Carbon Literacy Project.
Mhm.
I think they look at different industries, but then they have obviously strands of training within that. And because her background is theatre,
Yeah.
she offers that training very much with a specific theatre understanding, and really even I'd say within that theatre building. I think it was very interesting actually hearing that within the context of National Youth Theatre, which does have a building, but it's actually much more about a company and particularly about young people. And going, actually, I think there's even more to be explored about that community angle, like what you were talking about earlier, which I think wasn't necessarily being trained in that session, but I think could be developed. Maybe it's something we should look at in the future, but about how one can use that civic role
Yes.
uh, within a community for that.
I think like randomly you saying that, like I think back to when we came to visit NYT and like even your costume store, like the way that that gives back to not just your own company, but there is so much like preservation and like reusing and a sort of, I don't know, like a sort of conscious choice to use materials that you already have. I know Mount View is the same. Like we have so much in storage here that we're always encouraged to use before making any sort of purchases of anything else, and being really sort of considerate about our usage of any sort of resources and materials here. But that it all kind of, it's what you can lend and borrow, and it's a really nice sort of starting point is thinking about like, yeah, community and ways that you can help each other.
Yeah, definitely. I will just say one thing on the costumes is that everything can get recycled. Even bits of my wedding dress were turned into a costume. So it all goes round.
Yes, exactly. Like I think a very scary thought, but something that I think was really important for me and my understanding of like my impact on the planet is that like anything I ever use is around forever, essentially. Unless I sort of consume it like a meal. I don't know, like everything I've ever like owned or wore, like clothes I had as a child, they're somewhere. So it's sort of thinking about new ways I can like reuse things and change things and adapt them. Um, Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Rosie. It's been a real pleasure talking to you a bit more about sustainability in theatre. Um, Again, like I hope this conversation inspires anybody listening to sort of think about like the opportunities for growth and hope that there is without having to think about climate anxiety and and the potential for growth and change that is real and is sort of happening, and how theatre can be a great industry to help implement that change within the wider landscape of our community.
Oh, I've loved chatting to you. Thanks so much, Karis.
It was really great to chat with Rosie and discuss sustainability in theatre. Interestingly, the week that this podcast was recorded, Theatre Green Book hosted a panel specifically focusing on sustainable practices in touring theatre on the 24th of June. It would have been really interesting to go and see what they have to say about how we can make touring more sustainable, and to hear what some of the panelists might have also been able to contribute to the discussions Rosie and I were having. After speaking with Rosie, I was encouraged to look at more positive climate news within the theatre and arts industry to help combat climate anxiety, which is something I think we can all feel sometimes, and find a little bit of joy in the small progress that different theatre companies are making. Norwich Theatre launched their 2023 season last year, titled Creative Matters Climate Stories. The theatre's creative director, Stephen Crocker, said, "This season creates a space where they are supported to grapple with both positive and negative feelings around the climate crisis and constructively build their own path and bridges with others." Some of the shows featured in the season included the English touring opera's production of The Wish Gatherer and Sarah Middleton's She-Wolves, which also toured at the Southwark Playhouse earlier last year. The Wolfson Foundation, who work with Theatres Trust, have donated over £500,000 last year to help improve sustainability in theatres as part of its theatre improvement scheme. Vamos Theatre Company, who are based in Worcestershire and perform entirely masked, have shared their achievements for their second year of their sustainability plan, including sourcing 75% of their props and costumes second-hand and using local businesses and suppliers instead of large corporations when ordering things. Overall, I hope that this podcast has left you feeling positive and hopeful about the future of the creative arts in the face of climate change and excited to try and embed this into your own creative practice. I think we can all take small steps to reduce our own impact and make our practice more sustainable. And taking action such as reading the Theatre Green Book, doing carbon literacy training like Rosie was discussing, or even just educating ourselves about how to better our own practice in sustainable ways by looking at what other organisations and companies are doing can help contribute to this positive change. Thank you very much for listening. Make sure to check back in with VIEWcast for more episodes about our ever-changing industry.